How's it going? I love your avatar. Is that for real?
That is me, man, back in the day in like 77, 78.
Where? I'm gonna guess Carlsbad Sparks or Reseda Skater Cross.
No, man, I'm East Coast. That's Florida. So
oh wow.
It's
Sensation Basin.
Skate Town, USA.
Wow.
In Fort Lauderdale. Or that one was Longwood Pipeline.
Very impressive. That's OG.
Oh, I'm hoping we get to talk about some OG skating. That's where I'm all at.
All right.
Steven is OG on so many levels, honestly.
Oh.
Yep.
Although never knew there was this side of Steven.
Tony, we're going to get going in just a minute. For everyone joining in, we're going to give it a minute. We have someone really special with us today, and we're learning about Steven's secret skateboarding history. So it's going to be a really fun episode.
It's not secret, Tony. I once turned a laptop into a skateboard, and that's like my thing.
Is that a euphemism?
Well, that's why I'm here.
Okay. Should we? Sriram, what do you think?
I think we can. I think we can get going. All right, let's get going. Steven, hit the music.
We're ready.
Live from San Francisco and here on Clubhouse, it's The Good Time Show, bringing you today in technology. And now your hosts, Aarthi and Sriram.
Awesome. I love that audio. Hey, folks, welcome to tonight's Good Time Show. This is Aarthi, and we have Sriram here. We also have Steven Sinofsky, Garry Tan. We have Paul joining us tonight. Hey, Paul, welcome.
Hey, what's up?
And of course, we have an awesome special guest tonight. And just for people who are joining us for the first time, we've been doing this pretty much every weekday night and some weekends too. We've been doing this for a couple of months where we spend an hour just bringing in some special guest and talking about, their life, their experiences, and keeping this like a really casual conversation. And we typically cover, tech, culture, movies, that kind of thing. And tonight is no exception. I'm really, really excited to have our special guest join our show tonight, Sriram.
Wow. Okay. So we're really, really excited for this. When we tweeted about this earlier, I think it blew people's minds, and
it made us cool for a couple seconds. We just were like ultra cool kids.
we were very cool. We were very, very cool. And then that moment passed.
Yep.
It's kind of a cliche to say this person needs no introduction, but I really think this person almost needs no introduction. But I will try anyway. The most famous skateboarder of all time. He's the owner of his own skateboard company, which we're going to get into, Birdhouse. But I think my experience, and I think a lot of other people's experience with him, is a incredibly successful line of video games. I think we all spend hours and hours playing. And probably, one of the few sports/cultural icons who's just so universally beloved. And so we're just so really excited to have this person. And the first question I want to ask you is, has anybody ever told you that you sound exactly like Tony Hawk?
Not today.
What's up with that meme though, Tony? Like I see it on your Twitter all the time, where it's like you just quote these like incidents of people just saying that you look like Tony Hawk. Have you heard you've looked like what is going on there?
Well, for one, it's all true. I think that the misconception is that that's the only encounter I have with people, and that is not the case at all. As a matter of fact, most of my encounters with people are more like, "Hey, what's up? Are you Tony Hawk?" "Yes." "Cool, nice to meet you. Can I get a selfie?" "Yeah, cool, thank you, bye." And so I just want to squash the rumor that I'm complaining about not being recognized. That's usually how it goes.
Yeah.
But the thing is especially with all of the airline regulations and things in recent years, you have to show ID. And so that's usually where I get this sort of confusion, because my ID says Anthony. My legal name's Anthony. I've never been known by Anthony, but that's my name. And so they see Anthony Hawk, they look at my face, and they kind of recognize it, but it probably looks a lot older than they imagined it would, because they have me stuck in this time warp of the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
And then they try to make the connection, but they ultimately don't. And those are the ones I share, the experiences I share. And it's weird because when they happen, I don't think of them as being that significant. But when I leave the situation and look back on it, and I'm like, man, if someone saw that, they would think it's hilarious. So those are the ones that I share. And that's how this sort of meme got created. And it's weird to think that has taken a life of its own, because now it's like it's so meta. Nowadays, I literally will get today even, it's like, hey man, does anyone ever tell you look like Tony Hawk? Because they're trying to be funny.
What?
Yeah.
What? I thought I was funny. Wait, is this like a meta comment?
Well, yeah, I mean, you gave it a twist.
You worked
so
all
I'll give
day
you
on that,
credit for
Tony, so cut him some slack.
You had a unique angle on it, so I'll give you that.
Thank you. Getting props from Tony Hawk. Okay, now I think like I have like enough cool points to last me for a very, very long time. Tony, maybe in one way we can maybe go back to almost the very beginning. And I think this might be a story I think you have covered in like other places. But could you just like talk to us about just getting into skateboarding? But by age 12 you have your first sponsor. But just how you kind of just got into the whole thing.
I got into it. Well, it was the late 70s, and skateboarding was in its sort of fad stage of popularity when the Dogtown and Z-Boys were making a name for themselves. And my older brother was a surfer, so he started skating by default because that was like an extension of surfing. And that's really what the Dogtown Z-Boys were about, was trying to emulate surfing in empty swimming pools. And so my brother got into that a little bit. And one day he was skating in the alleyway behind our house, and one of his old boards was there. And I just said, hey, can I try this? And he's like, yeah, go ahead. And I stood on it, and I went to the end of the alleyway, and I kept yelling back, how do I turn? How do I turn? And then I ran into the fence and got splinters in my hands, and picked up the board and turned around. And so I didn't have some great epiphany. It wasn't like, it wasn't like the clouds parted and there were harps playing. It was more like this was a fun way to get transportation.
Yeah.
And so that was my introduction to it. Eventually I started skating with friends in my neighborhood that were my age, that we were just doing as transportation. Every once in a while, someone would build a little terrible ramp in their driveway, and then we would skate that for the day until the neighbors complained. And then eventually I got to go to the nearby skate park with, back then with the permission slip from your parents. And I went, and I remember seeing people literally flying out of pools. And when I saw that, that's when I had my great epiphany, when I was like, I want to do that. Whatever it takes to get to that, I want to do it. And I was maybe 10 or 11 at the time, super scrawny, very frail. And that was it. I committed myself to skateboarding.
Wow. Also as a frail 10-year-old or a little bit younger, starting to skate, I loved what you said about how it was seen as a mode of transportation. I'm curious what your first memories of, if you look back, I don't think at the time what's going on, but what was the culture like? Were they, rebellious? Was it hard rock? Was it punk? How do you see it as in a sense, like compared to, say, the culture of the football team or the culture of the basketball team? And, did you see it later on as a sport, or was it always still this recreation mode of transport?
Well, in my neighborhood, it was very much more the transportation factor and a little bit of the sort of driveway ramps and things, but we were all very, very young. So we didn't think of it as a culture, or we weren't associating fashion or music to it. It wasn't until I went to the skate park and I saw this group of misfits and their style and the music that was playing there. And that's when I really understood that this is something different and it's set apart from the mainstream. And at the time I was playing baseball, I was playing little league, I was playing basketball, and I felt like this is where I belong. You know, I never felt that I was fitting in with the team sports. I enjoyed them, but I never felt like I was excelling at them. And I didn't like that everyone was relying on my performance for their success or the vice versa. And so when I started skating, it was like, oh, this is on my terms. This is in my own style. And these people accept me and they're all weirdos. And I was like this, you know, scrawny, nerdy kid that got picked on a lot in school. And so I was like, oh, this is my crew. And so, yeah, it was definitely counterculture. It was, you know, mostly rooted in punk music and I guess more punk fashion. I want to say it was like surf punk fashion. And I remember going back to school when I really got into the lifestyle, whatever lifestyle that was. I'm going to the skate park every day after school and trying to explain to my friends there what it was like and the kind of music we were listening to, and they just didn't get it. And I remember thinking, oh, this is where I've lost my sort of childhood friends and classmates because they're never going to get this.
Oh, don't look now, but what you're doing is you're explaining to every, you know, programmer person what their life was like when they were 12 and they were sitting at home coding, and everybody else was like, why are you doing that? I'm completely mesmerized, but I also, like, actually, just to give you an idea of my OG-ness in this, I was right there at the transition from when it went from like really bad, like not Metallica, but like Bad Company kind of music to like punk. And it was like, I remember the Police being on the cover of Skateboarder magazine, and we just called it a day then. We were like, we can't be part of this sport anymore because the Police are in it and they're like punk rock, new wave.
But that's my experience too. In fact, I think I explained it to someone recently where I said, most of my friends, all they cared about was Kiss and Foreigner and Loverboy. And I was like, I'm listening to the Dead Kennedys and I'm 11, you know, and the Sex Pistols and X and Circle Jerks. And I was actually at a skate park in LA practicing for an event when a flood of punkers came in to the park and actually took over the skate area. And I remember my older brother like being concerned and saying, what is going on here? And I was like, I don't know, but I can't skate anymore because they're filling the place up. So we left. And what I found out later was the Circle Jerks were playing at the skate park that night. And if you go look up the cover of Group Sex album, that was the bowl I was skating in at the time. They're all standing in that bowl.
That's unbelievably cool in that regard. Let's dig in a little bit to this notion of the role of skateboarding in culture broadly, because I think it's so interesting, and in many ways you've defined this role to today, but it's gone through this whole, and you described it a little earlier on, like it was, you know, sort of the cool of California, sidewalk surfing, long hair, long beards, freestyle, and, you know, surf music. And then it became like, you know, I remember that when Southern rock and bad music became part of it, and certainly both East and West Coast with pool skating. I don't know about you, but we stole all the plywood for those ramps from like.
Oh yeah, no, they used to spray paint the stack of wood on the side so that they could identify the stolen wood when they'd come to bust you for a half pipe.
Oh yeah, and all this, the wood, the cinder blocks, like we grew up in the same deal. But this, you know, and then the interesting thing I think culturally is that skateboarding has always had, I mean, very clearly with you know, Tony Alva, Dogtown, all that, was this rebellious element to it. I mean, just, you know, breaking into somebody's backyard and draining their pool was kind of a rebellious thing.
Right, but I think that's the misconception all along, is that it wasn't that. I mean, for sure, skaters were you know, they loved that there was counterculture and they're doing something different. But the sort of criminal and punk element came in because we had no place to do it.
Yeah.
So in order to do it, because the skate parks were closing and mostly gone, you had to trespass to find a place to do it. So you had to be a certain type of character with that kind of resolve, that you didn't care about getting busted, or that you just, were saying, fuck you, we're going to go do it anyway. And that's the kind of person it took to be a skater then.
And just, I feel like the need to draw these parallels, because certainly back, if you were using a home computer, then you were fighting your parents to use the phone line and stay up all night. And there's that same kind of rebellion. And I feel, and maybe it's because, we both lived it, but there's this parallel of skating becoming mainstream. And that's sort of what I think is so interesting. Like, after the Dogtown originals and that era, then came the 80s and your rise. And then all of a sudden, you go to a fair and there's like a 30-foot Pepsi ramp and Mountain Dew ramps, and it's broadly commercial.
Well, so we thought. I mean, all those days, it felt like it was on a roll and that it had become mainstream. But if you really look at the late 80s, it was still just considered a trend or a fad. I mean, if you look at the coverage and you look at the how the mainstream media was portraying it, they were considering it like, look at these crazy kids and they're doing they're skating pools and doing flips and stuff, and they got wacky hairdos and crazy skate names, but it was never that they were going to embrace it.
So what was the turning point? Where do you think that really changed for people? I mean, because skating today, and certainly not long after that mainstream media not getting it, it was just a thing that every kid in suburbia did instead of biking around.
I think there was a combination. When the X Games started, I mean, the X Games was also a novelty when it started, like 1995. It was skateboarding, but it was also rollerblading and bungee jumping and sky surfing and rock climbing, and all those things were supposed to be extreme. So that was a little strange, but there was something there that spoke to kids because they loved the daredevil aspect of these sports. And so as the X Games evolved and those other odd sports kind of fell by the wayside, what we saw was skateboarding, BMX, motocross, and obviously in the winter games like snowboarding became the things that kids wanted to watch instead of mainstream sports on TV. And I think that between the rise of the X Games in the late 90s and the release of our video game series, like that was the tipping point for skateboarding. And it's kind of been here since then.
I want to come back to obviously the games in just a second. But I want one more question about the rise, which was, and the X Games played a super important part of this. But, back when it was sort of this OG era, you couldn't ever see another skateboarder. Like the only time was like when one of the pros would come visit your skate park, if it was still open, and you'd get to watch them and your mind would be blown because, you're looking at still photos or like these motor drive photo sequences in Skateboarder magazine, trying to reverse engineer an ollie or something. And you just couldn't do it. And so
it was funny. The media back then too. I mean, a lot of people tell me this, like if you weren't living in California and you weren't right there at an event or whatever, you didn't know what happened until 4 months later when the magazines came out, or 6 months later when the video came out.
And again, like exactly like the rise of computing was just like that. The thing we used to do is go to the library and they would show those, like the Stacy Peralta, those 16mm movies. And, we would get our parents to drive us like, twice a year for some special showing that cost $3 to go see. But I wonder, so in a sense, you were always able to see what was going on. And so I always wondered like what it would have been like if you could have seen skaters from everywhere when you were little. Would the sport have moved faster? Would it have pushed you? Or do you think you would have seen it differently?
I'd like to think that there would be a much more equal representation of different countries if social media, the internet existed back then, because it was more that we had the facilities and we were all feeding off each other, and anyone that didn't have access to that was sort of making it up or trying to find their way in the dark. And so if everyone had seen what was happening in real time, I think that, you wouldn't, in those days, you wouldn't have seen the core of skating just in the West Coast.
Yeah, that's great. Tony, I wanted to ask you about THPS 1 and 2. And, I think it's one of the most popular games out there. You're one of the few sports people who's also, an avid gamer, and it really shows. You basically, it's gone to a point where I think in some interview you'd mentioned how people sometimes think you're not a real person, you're a video game character. And you've just raised the bar so much there. And at some point, I think it helped sell PlayStation consoles because the game was just that popular. Tell us about how you came up with it. Like, why video game? Why did you get into it? What is the inception story behind THPS? And how involved were you the early days when you kicked it off and started the project?
Well, the inception of THPS was basically, I was approached by a PC programmer to pitch a skateboarding game around 1997, because he felt like it would be a fun engine that he could create. And so this guy made a very crude engine on a PC of a skateboarder that would go sort of in and out of bowls. He didn't have any tricks that were programmed in it yet, but I was just excited to do anything because I had consumed every video game that included skateboarding up until that point. So it was 720 in the arcade, Skate or Die for Commodore 64, California games. I mean, anything that had any kind of skateboarding in it, I was on it. And so I felt like it was always underrepresented. I felt like definitely wasn't, none of those were authentic. Mm-hmm. And so when he came up with the idea, I said, yeah, cool. So he and I went to a few different publishers and came up against a lot of negativity. And he gave up. He said, look, I can't, I need to find a job. I can't do this. Mm-hmm. This isn't even really my dream. I was just thought it would be a fun side project. And so he gave up. But because I had been to all these meetings, including console manufacturers, my name was out there that I wanted to work on something. And at the same time, Activision had already started testing a skate game. And so they called me and they said, hey, we heard that you want to do a skate game. And I said, well, yeah, I want to, but the guy that I was working with gave up. And he said, well, we have a developer that is working on a game and we think you should come check it out. So I went up to Activision and I went to a boardroom. I mean, it was just such a cliche, like boardroom, bunch of stuffy suits. I came in looking like a skateboarder, I guess. And they wheeled up a PlayStation and I started playing this game that was basically Bruce Willis as a character with a gun strapped to his back, because they had just done a game called Apocalypse, and Apocalypse was one of the first games to ever feature a celebrity or to have licensing. Mm-hmm. So Apocalypse failed miserably, but their engine for the game itself was great for skateboarding. So they re-engineered it and still used, they were still using Bruce Willis as the character, but they put him on a skateboard, and I started playing this game and it was intuitive. Like the controls, I immediately did an ollie, I immediately did a kickflip, and I thought, wow, this really is it. And this is so far beyond anything anyone's ever done with skateboarding. I basically signed up immediately because I knew with my resources and my input, like we could make this something that would be authentic.
Yeah, that's great. You'd mentioned in the beginning, you just got a bunch of negative feedback. Why was it negative? What did they not get?
Well, they just, I mean, I remember one conversation, and I've tried to disguise this in the past, but it was with Midway, and the guy said basically, skateboarding isn't even popular, why would anyone want to play a game based on skateboarding?
Got it.
I felt like I was defending a thesis at that point, and I basically just kind of got frustrated and said, I think this would be a really fun game to play, even if you're not a skater.
Yeah, and you had Neversoft pitch you, and that impressed you more than, like, at that time, way more popular studios. What did you see with Neversoft?
Well, Neversoft was the developer for Activision.
Yeah.
So when I saw what Activision was working on, that was actually Neversoft.
Got it.
I'm curious, kind of fast forwarding, like, quite a bit of time, how was it to, when, like, last year you had, 1+2 come out, did you, I'm guessing, like, what kind of the emotions to be like, okay, here's this kind of franchise, which is probably outlasted, like, most of the sports gaming franchises, and we can almost take it full circle back. Like, how did this feel to have it now still be played, still be relevant to kids everywhere, just like, generations later?
It's unreal. I was, let's put it this way. My biggest mark of success is that we got to do one sequel. And, that was most exciting to me because I felt like there were things that were missing from the first one that we could develop in the second one. And then once we did number 2, and then, subsequently 3 and 4, American Wasteland, everything else, it was all just insane. It was just all a dream come true. And so to be able to release the first 2 games on current consoles 20 years later just seemed like it was not possible. And it was a lot of, we had a lot of expectation. We had a lot to live up to, but Vicarious Visions was the one who took on the project. I thought they did a great job. It got, really good reviews. Anyone that was a fan of the game embraced it. But the thing that I really appreciated was that we got to bring that series to a whole new generation.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's also true for, like, I think some ways like the Madden franchise or some of these other franchises, but I think you are so tied to the sport, probably unlike anything else I've seen. I'm curious, how many kids or young people just know you because of the game and nothing else?
I think that was more apparent in the mid 2000s. That's when the name Tony Hawk was more synonymous with the game than it was with my person, my person. I remember one time I was at an event and this woman said, "Hey," to her son, "Hey, this is Tony Hawk." And he whispered to her and she said, "He wants to know if they named you after the video game."
Oh my God. Okay. I want to just go back in time just a little bit. It's kind of like the early 90s. And could you just talk to us about, I think in one of your interviews, you spoke of how a lot of skateboarding companies don't often last. I'm just curious to get your story on, just the evolution, the origin story of Birdhouse and Blitz and how that came about in the 90s, because one of the things you talk about is how, like, skateboarding goes through ups and downs, and as hot as it was maybe the 80s, in the 90s was maybe a slightly different story for a while.
Yeah, so around 1992, in 1992 I felt like my career was crashing down because skateboarding was losing its popularity. All the skate parks were closing. My style of skating, which was more ramp and vert, was becoming very uncool. And so I felt like the sky was falling on my career, and I didn't really want to do anything else with my life. In terms of being in another industry. So based on living through 2 cycles of skateboarding's popularity, one in the late 70s, the other in the mid 80s, I felt like skateboarding should be on a trajectory to come back in a few years. That was the hope. And so I basically took out a second mortgage on my house, and I combined forces with another ex-pro skater, Per Wieslander, and he and I put all of our money into starting a skate company. And basically between he and I, we were doing everything. He was doing all the business, all the sales. I was doing all the marketing, team management, tour planning, ads, videos. And it was, let's just put it this way. We liked being able to do all those things and being in control, but we didn't think we'd have to do it for so long before we turned a profit.
It's by the way, I think one of your pieces I read, like, were you actually at the time, were you considering a career in computers? Because you've always been really into tech.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny you were asking me about, I mean, you guys were talking about how hackers or programmers probably felt the same way. I remember I was programming in BASIC in 8th grade, and then I bought a Texas Instruments TI-99 4A and learned how to program in that language, which was really difficult. And then through those years, I couldn't afford a Mac, so I bought an Amiga with a Mac emulator.
Wow.
And then I would do all the Birdhouse ads on Quark Express running on the Mac emulator.
That's really hardcore, and of course,
it was pretty hardcore. And I
cooler.
talk about this. I mean, if you want to get into the weeds on, I was talking about this
yes.
with my friend who he and I bought an Amiga together. He was like my fellow super nerd. He actually works at HP now, but I was talking about, do you remember when we couldn't afford RAM and we had to use virtual memory on our hard drive? And if you don't know what that's like, I don't wish it upon you. But I remember leaving, like I would render a Birdhouse, 8x12 ad for a magazine, and I'd have to leave it rendering overnight because I was using virtual RAM.
Wow, that's so cool.
That is very cool. That's very OG.
Yeah,
that is very legit, Tony.
That
and
was
you're
OG.
speaking our
Yeah. And then I ended up buying a video toaster and a video card to do all of our videos.
That's amazing.
Staying on the 90s, by the way, I just love the nerding out, right? I think you're speaking our love language right here when you talk about breaking out the TI and programming there. I remember talking about hardcore, hard to use programming frameworks. Steven has a mystery there, but that's a story for another day. I want to go to the mid 90s, right? Like you were part of the original X Games and that whole era. So what was that like? Because I remember growing up in India and watching that, and it just felt so cool. It's X for extreme, and it just felt like so edgy and so cool. What was that like, being part of that era back then?
It was, it was cool. Let's put it this way. It was cool to get that kind of coverage. It was cool to be celebrated on TV finally again. It wasn't cool to be grouped together with so many random sports, because the way they presented it was we were extreme athletes. And so you would go somewhere else and you'd be like, oh, what do you do for a living? I'm a professional skateboarder. Oh, you're extreme. Like, oh, you must be really good at rock climbing and sky surfing and eco challenge. And you know what I mean? And it just wasn't, we prided ourselves because we skated. That set us apart. And then suddenly we were grouped together with a bunch of random other sports, and that didn't sit well with the skate community.
Okay, so this is a question, and I want to ask this in a way which is like, this might, as somebody like an outsider, right? I think when you see, say, LeBron or, somebody hit like a crazy windmill dunk, you have an idea of how hard it is because a lot of us might have tried it on the basketball court. For somebody who has never skated or maybe has skated much, how explain the effort and the years it takes to pull off a 900?
Well, I can only speak from my experience, but wow, all of my I keep getting these texts from some friends of mine that I respect highly. So what's up, Guy? What's up, Amanda?
This is like a late night radio show now.
Guy and Amanda, they're listening? Cool.
They are, yes.
That's awesome.
And so, like I said, I want to speak from my experience. My experience was I first started, I learned how to do a 720 in 1985. So that's a double spin in the air. And that was the year after the 540 was invented. I didn't create the 540, but I had to learn it right away because I felt like that was the future. And so after I learned a 720, the next step in spinning would be 900, and 900 was just much more of a commitment. It's like it's a 2.5 spin. You're blind twice to your landing, and it's just a whole different commitment level. So I tried it off and on for years. I actually didn't. I didn't get the guts to really try it until around 1988. And then when I finally started getting close, it was in the mid 90s. I ended up breaking a rib on one of the ones that I committed to, and I kind of gave up on it. It was like, it's just too hard. It's too dangerous. And then fast forward to the 99 X Games, they were having a best trick event, which we had best trick events through the year. So it was always sort of a sideshow to the main competition. And so I didn't take it that seriously. And I had one trick in mind that I wanted to do, and I got that done very early on in the event. And there was still half of the time left, about 10 minutes left. And I thought, well, the next trick that I would like to do, the best trick, is a 900, but I've never done it. And I'll just throw some for the crowd. I mean, that was really the whole goal of what I was doing, was like, I'll show the crowd what could be next, and that'll be enough. And then as I started spinning, my spin was consistent, and I felt like I could spot my landing almost every time. And in the past, I would only spot my landing maybe 1 out of 4 or 5 attempts, because the ramps were so terrible back then. You couldn't rely on them. And I felt like, wow, I'm actually spotting my landing, and maybe I should try to make a couple. And when I finally tried to make one, I fell forward exactly the way that I broke my rib the first time, but I didn't break my rib.
Wow.
And that was the moment where I thought, I'm either going to make this tonight or I'm going to be taken away in an ambulance.
Oh my gosh.
So your success bar was not breaking something.
And not getting knocked unconscious. That's a pretty low bar to set, but that was it. Yeah.
We've talked all night about the comparison with like skating and what you're doing with computer science and writing code. That's the one thing that I would never have like coders be able to say, being like, well, either I like fix this bug tonight or I'm taken away in an ambulance. Never happens. Not a thing to worry about.
That's true, but I feel like my journey was a little different in that I had already been knocked out a few times. My teeth 5 times, my front teeth 5 times up to that.
Oh my God.
So that kind of stuff wasn't going to deter me.
Wow.
Tony, I think there was a recent tweet, maybe from a few months ago, of you trying the 720 after I think maybe a few years, and I just love you being like, well, I have these injuries and I'm also old.
Yeah, well, that's pretty much it. I think it's funny. I think that with my skate career, I've kind of passed through to the other side, where it used to be when I was younger, it was like, oh, you're really good for your age, and then it got to be like, I had a peak in my career through my teens and 20s, and then it became like, whoa, you still skate into your 30s? That's crazy. And then when I was 40, it was like, really, you still ride a skateboard in your 40s? And I've actually broken through to a side where, man, well, you can ride a skateboard in your 50s.
You might have gone full circle.
I get yelled at when I go to the park down the street, and I think of it like that. And the park, it's not like these giant 30-foot vertical walls we used to deal with. So I feel like if I fall, I should be able to recover.
One time, Tony, when I was like not even that old. I was in my 20s, but every time I would ollie, it would hurt my knee, and I'm like, oh, this sucks. I'm not that old. So I went to the doctor, and the doctor said, maybe just don't ollie. And I'm like, no, that's a terrible answer.
I reject that opinion of yours. Moving on.
Tony, you might have gone full circle, and you might hear people saying like, wow, you're really good for your age.
I'll take it.
Okay, I want to quickly, reset the room because I know we have a lot of people joining. Well, for everyone joining in recently, this is a good time show that Aarthi and I and skateboarder Steven, as we have discovered, and friends do almost every single night. We usually cover things in technology, but also sometimes we have very special figures from other places, and we have one today. The one and only person who sounds and looks exactly like Tony Hawk. I'm going to keep trying at that. I'm going to keep going at that. It's very meta now. It's very, very meta.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I think Tony, you talked about what it means to get started there. You talked about Birdhouse. Tell us about the skate park project. It's this whole like foundation that you're building, that you built to build free skate parks in low income areas. Why? I mean, I read about your origin story and how you grew up in one of these neighborhoods. What does it mean for you to like build this? Like, why this? You could build literally anything else, schools, baseball stadiums, whatever. Why skate parks? What's your belief there?
Well, it all stems from, I grew up near one of the very last skate parks in the US, and that was never lost on me how lucky I was to have that facility.
Mm-hmm.
Up in San Diego, Del Mar Skate Ranch was one of the last remaining skate parks in the 80s, and that was my home away from home. That's where I found my community. That's where I felt like I belonged. And it wasn't because it was a training ground of any kind. I mean, I didn't think I was going to make a career out of skateboarding. So it was just more that I had a place to go, and I felt like I connected with everyone. And so when I had some mode of success, and when I felt like a voice that could affect change, I wanted to provide the same kind of facility and place of belonging to kids in underserved areas and kids in areas that are very challenged. And we had no game plan. That was the great idea. And we have since figured out how to be very effective with our support, with our funding. We've given away, I think, over $10 million now. We've helped to support over 1,000 skate parks in the last 20 years.
Wow.
It's definitely the work I'm most proud of. And like I said, we're not trying to make any sort of training grounds for athletes. It's more just so that these kids who finally find something that speaks to them, who find something that they feel like they belong to, and for the most part have no support. In their communities, they're told not to skate in the street. They're told not to skate in the parking lot of the malls or in the plaza areas. And suddenly they feel like, their community cares about them.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a place to go that I'm safe and it's controlled. And I think that the best example is if you go to any skate park where you live, it's always in use, always. If it's light out, there's people skating, and you cannot say the same thing about any other sports facility.
Yeah, that's true.
I wonder, did you ever think that once your park got closed down, mine got turned into a sod farm or something? Did you ever? Isn't it amazing that you've managed to figure out how to work with local governments and have these be not just parks, but officially blessed, essentially government supported parks?
Well, we've learned, let's put it this way, we've learned how to show communities how to give that information to their cities, and to maybe sway the thinking of cities who are stuck in the mode of skaters, outcasts, rebels, troublemakers, stoners, that whole thing. And it's very much like, no, go to a park, go see the diversity that's there, and go see what it's doing for these kids. And we have plenty of examples, but we do actually have a resource and a step-by-step book on how to turn that tide in your neighborhood. And almost inevitably, when you finally do push them to get a park in their area, they always want to build more, because they see what a great addition it is to their community.
It's just super. Like, one of the things I definitely notice, and it is due to your work and the presence of the parks and in all the places that we've lived, is that you said diversity. And that's one of the things that's just strikingly different from when we were kids, is that you go and it's not just socioeconomic diversity, but now, it's not unusual to see more girls than boys skating, 8, 10, 12 years old. There's definitely been a rise of that. And that's just super cool. And now we're starting to see, amazing women young women like Sky Brown.
It definitely has changed very rapidly over the last few years, and it's the great equalizer. Like, people don't care what you look like, where you're from. They care what your sexual orientation is. They just care if you're a good skater.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I've always loved about it. I mean, that is what I felt like as super nerdy, awkward kid that was hanging out with much older, scary dudes. Like, they just cared how you skated.
Yeah, I think that's kind of inspiring, because that's one of the things that drew people like us into computers as like a parallel, where it didn't really matter what you look like, it just mattered how good you were, and what your passions were and what you cared about when you were behind the computer. So that really resonates with me. Totally segue kind of question. Tokyo 2021, I was reading about how this will be the first time, there's the first ever appearance of skateboarding at the Olympic Games. Are you excited about that? Are you going to be there? What are your thoughts?
The short answer is yes. I'm excited. I will be there. The longer answer is it's about time. And I feel like the Olympics need skateboarding's cool factor in their summer games more than we need their validation. But I'm all in, and I think that it's going to raise the awareness of skateboarding and the support for skateboarding in other countries. And I feel like that's probably the most important factor in all of this, is that countries like, especially in Asia and in Eastern Europe, will suddenly have skate parks and skate teams. And that's amazing.
Yeah.
But it's like when snowboarding, here's what I'm thankful for. I watched snowboarding go from being the most ridiculed sort of bastard of the Winter Olympics to becoming the most celebrated and the coolest thing that they have in their programming. I'm thankful that skateboarding doesn't have to go through that crazy growth, and that in its entry point, it's going to be celebrated.
That's great.
I love that, and I love the kind of just that journey. And I think you're definitely right about the Olympics needing you folks than the other way around. Hopefully, the Olympics actually happens this year, which I think is a whole other discussion.
I think it's gonna happen. That's the vibe I'm getting.
Wow. Okay. I think so. I mean, that's kind of what I've heard too. I think after last year, it has to be something really dramatic for it to not happen this year. Okay, this could maybe like a small, goofy, fun question, but since we are in technology, could you talk to us about your involvement with changing the skateboard emoji on all of our phones?
Yeah.
And can we submit other emojis for your consideration to get changed? We have a lot of feedback for the emoji police.
That was that was an interesting journey. Basically I saw a very strange video of possible upcoming emojis a couple years ago, and a very quick flash went by of a skateboard that looked like a skateboard you would have bought at Walmart in like 1984.
It was a pro line. It was a pro line with like those Stoker ball bearing wheels.
Yeah, with die cut grip tape. It was just clearly, it was a dated skateboard and not of a quality, and it was just like, where did they get this? How did that, and I did my own research and figured out how that whole process works, which is very complicated and very political. But just sort of put it out there into the world and said, hey guys, I know you're doing a skateboard and I don't think this represents modern skateboarding, maybe something more along these lines. And I just posted a picture of my skateboard. And it found the right person. And they asked me, well, what would you be willing to help us? And I said, absolutely. And so, I take that back. It wasn't my skateboard. I posted a photo of a person on a skateboard, like more of like along their styles. And this guy reached out to me and said, look, if we put a person on a skateboard, we have to add, I can't remember, 16 new emojis because of male, female, and skin color. And he said, so we're just going to go with a skateboard. So if you could send us a photo of a modern skateboard, that would help.
And an old person now. You need man, woman, and then old person skating.
I would hope so. I'm out here representing the old people skating, so absolutely.
That's awesome.
But the funny thing is, but to sum that up, if you see the skateboard emoji, the wheels are much bigger than what a usual skateboarder would ride, probably like a modern skateboard in the street. And that is because I'm a vert skater and I ride big wheels. And so
right.
I'm representing.
That's awesome.
You know, that might outlast anything else you have created, Tony. Like that
my
emoji.
legacy. My legacy is the emoji with big wheels.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's such a great story. Tony, I wanted to ask you about something you'd mentioned before on a flow state. You know, you talked about how while skating, you love the state that you get into, and how you love the creativity while figuring out a totally new trick, and how that's the most like exciting part for you with skating as such. When I read that, you know, that for me, I have a lot of battles there with tech and computers and software, where the flow state is all that we can aspire to get into, where you just feel like you're in the and the time when you figure out something, you build this awesome product, you find your first set of users, that kind of thing. That's the thing that really like gets us back into building good software. For you, I guess wanted to ask you, is skating really a sport for you, or is it now more like an art form for you? And do you skate? Like I wanted to get a little bit more philosophical into like flow state and why you get into skating, and do you skate now, why you do it, and is it more art than sport?
I've always considered it both. Maybe when I was younger, a little more sport because it was so steeped in competition, and that was the only way you could prove yourself or that you could get into recognition. You know, in my day, there was no YouTube, there was no social media. So if you wanted to make a name for yourself, you had to compete.
Right.
And so in that sense, that was the sporting element of it. That was the sport. But I did always feel like it was, you're comparing apples to oranges. This guy's hand plant doesn't look like this other guy's hand plant. To make one harder than the other, I don't know, and that's up to the judges. But I think that I think it very much is an art form as well, and there are plenty of people nowadays that only do it because of the artistry of it. They have no interest in competition. They have no interest in being compared to anyone else, and the beauty of that is that they actually do have the opportunity to make a career out of it because of social media. And so these days, yeah, it's way more. Well, for me, it's my outlet. I can't explain it any other way. Sure, it's an art form, but my skating these days, I'm not competing, obviously, but I still have the drive to want to learn new tricks, and that's my outlet. Like that's my zen, and so I guess that's my art.
I think you just got to something which I was going to ask you about. I was watching you on Rogan while preparing for this conversation, and one thing I always say, you just talk about the buzz that comes from coming up with a new trick. Are you just in the back of your brain? Are you just thinking of new tricks all the time, just like a musician think?
Yeah,
wow.
I think to a fault, yes.
Wow. Okay, that's amazing.
But also I think and a lot of times I'll think of tricks that I know that I'm no longer capable of figuring out, but I can't help it. I think that's just what's always driven me. And it's funny because nowadays, back in the 80s, even 90s, if you tried to figure out a trick, you were trying to figure it out because you're going to put it in your repertoire. You were going to have that in your back pocket for a big contest or something like that. Nowadays, the tricks are so technical and so difficult that you're going to try it, hundreds of times to make one. And if you make that one and you get it on video, that's it.
Wow.
And that's basically my approach these days is I have an idea for a trick. I know it's going to be insanely difficult and I'm going to go shoot it on video and that's it. One and done.
Tony, I had a question. I mean, about flow state and coming up with new tricks. Like, is it in the practice process, or is it, you know, in the process of actually figuring it out, or is it when the cameras are rolling or in competition, you know, or is it both, or, you know, is there a relative sort of weight to each, or, you know, what
I think they're all
what's it
different.
like?
If you want to talk about like flow state or getting in the zone, that's
Yeah.
usually more when you're in competition and you just feel that rhythm that sort of comes from elsewhere, and you're just along for the ride. That's definitely, in my experience, that's been my flow state. When I'm figuring out a trick, it seems painfully arduous, like to figure out each step of it and to make minor adjustments. And I love all that, but it's so slow, and it's so much energy that it's hard to say that's my flow state, because
Yeah,
at some point I'm so angry and exhausted that I just want to make it and go home.
totally.
The problem I always had with tricks is we would play Tony Hawk Pro Skater, and then we would walk outside, and then we'd be like, "Oh, that'd be pretty cool if we ollie up to that roof and then do a rail slide." Oh, wait a minute.
Yeah.
This isn't. Wait a minute.
The
we can't
scary
actually
thing
do
is that now there is a level of skating, especially. But I was going to say, the scary thing is that now there is a level of skating, especially in the street, that those tricks are real.
Wow.
You guys go look up Shane O'Neill. He learned how to skate by playing our game, and he does combinations that seem unreal.
Totally.
Do-
It's
do
crazy
you ever-
how
like
it
it's
just
possible.
escalates
Do you ever-
every year. Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
it's like surfing. You watch people do 360 airs like they're nothing, and that was such a first time you ever saw someone do that. It blew your mind.
Do you,
Right.
do you ever reflect on that, Tony, and think like, God, like, you know, like just these basic things that people do now were just incomprehensible. Like you would say like the physics don't even let you do that. And
Yeah, it's unreal. I like I said, I see some of the stuff, especially on video. I see combos, and my first thought is, wow, THPS is real.
I mean, I think it actually is across a lot of sports where you now see things totally inspired by video games, you know, because pretty much everybody's kind of grown up watching, you know, playing these, and they don't try it, you know, on like a real field somewhere. You know,
The same you can say the same thing about the progression of any sport, where nowadays people know that a 900 is possible, a 1080 is possible, and so they can get to that stage much more quickly and feel like they can do it. And I think the same thing has happened through skateboarding all the years, is that when I started, I knew what was possible. And then as I went to test the limits of other things, it wasn't very easy, but if I had known someone else had done it, it would have been easier to attain.
Tony, I think it's one couple of last questions before we wrap. One is somewhat meta, right? Because I think, you know, when I look at the time when you just really became popular and, you know, kind of had, you know, a lot of the kind of the exploits in your career that you're really known for, it was kind of in, you know, the 90s and, you know, in 80s, where kind of the television is kind of breaking out, is going international. And I was thinking about how you, Michael Jordan, Wayne Gretzky, and I think Tiger Woods have all become like basically a symbol of their sport in ways maybe nobody else has ever been able to achieve ever again. Do you ever think about that, and why, you know, each one of you, and maybe maybe one or two others, have become so, you know, almost one with the sport they represent? And do you ever kind of reflect on that?
I mean, if anyone is saying my name in the same breath as MJ, I'm honored beyond belief. Yeah, I think sometimes, but also I feel like if that is thrust upon me, if that's how people see me, I want to represent skateboarding as best as I can. I do feel like with great power comes great responsibility, and so it gets tricky for sure. But like I said, I'm honored that people would think that my name is synonymous with it, and I want to represent all aspects of it, not just what I do, which is more the acrobat, the vert ramp. You know, I want to represent the kids that are hopping fences, skating schoolyards, getting kicked out, you know, just wanting to get that crooked grind on the handrail. Like that's important too.
I love this, you know, because I think, you know, without you, there is like a big possibility that skateboarding does not have a positive image, and it's just kind of associated with unruly law breaking kids. Okay, one last question on and this kind of topic of kids, and we're going to wrap after this. There are going to be a lot of kids watching this, listening to this, or who are probably watching you or playing skateboarding right now. What do you want to tell kids who are thinking of getting into skateboarding or have just got into it? What do you want to tell them?
I want to say go for it and take it slow. The things that you're seeing people do, it's taken us years, even decades to develop. I can't say that anyone's a natural, and just pick your own challenges and go little by little, because eventually you'll get to that place that you're hoping to get to. And I try to tell kids that all the time. He's like, I can't ollie. I'm like, dude, ollies weren't invented until I was 12 years old. And start slow, like ollie a coin first, then maybe ollie a Sharpie, then a 2x4, like and then before you know it, you're going to be cruising down the street ollieing up curves. Like you won't even think about it. It's just more that they want that immediate gratification, and you got to tell them like this stuff takes time and it takes practice, but it's worth it in the end.
Wow. Okay. I don't think that's a better note to end on. Basically get out there and get started. Okay. I think we just about at time, and this has been just amazing. So I just want to thank everybody first for everybody listening in. And Tony, when you open up your phone, outside of the people texting you, you will see that you have so many tweets from people just getting this major gush of nostalgia from hearing you. Feeling the childhood's coming back to you, and just loving it, you and everything you represent. So for everyone, first of all, who listened and sent us tweets and comments and listened here, just thank you so much. This is just so fun. And I know you folks probably had as much fun as we did. And also to our usual crew, Aarthi as always, Garry, Paul, who I kind of now learned had a much more fun childhood than I thought, but mostly Steven. Steven, who I kind of always thought was kind of a boring, nerd, but apparently
Microsoft exec.
but wasn't. So thank you, Steven.
I don't even know what to say to that, so just keep going.
But most of all, to somebody just hasn't disappointed. He doesn't look like him. He doesn't sound like him. He's the one and only, the OG, Tony Hawk. Tony, you were amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah. And hey, you can text me. I'm on the community app. So 760-492-6712.
There you go. There you go. Text Tony Hawk. But first, get outside and start skating. All right, Tony. So we have a tradition here. I know you might have listened to the show. We have a tradition where we try and play a song to play us out, which is tied to either the guest or the content of the show. And to play us out today, I wanted to pick a song.